Let's learn something new today about something we all know too much about. I'm talking about anger. I bet when you think about this emotion, nothing positive immediately comes to mind. Let's put it to the test. I want you to think back to the last time you felt blindsided by your own anger. Maybe it was in a meeting when someone dismissed your idea, or at home when you felt unheard or disrespected. Your reaction? Well, it likely came fast, followed by words you wished you could take back and tension that lingered far too long. These are the moments when anger isn't just an emotion, it's a disruptor of connection, reputation, and trust. Let's keep that in mind as we go through this podcast. Anger is a disruptor of connection, reputation, and trust. Anger, more than any other emotion, can change the way people perceive you, and not in a good way. This is understandable when you think of anger as like emotional nitroglycerin, giving people a false sense of power and motivation to be selfish than ever before. That's why this conversation today, with everything that's happening around us today, matters so much. So welcome back to the Rethink Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. David Zierk. This podcast is where we step back, pause, and explore smarter and more connected ways to lead and live by thinking with connection in mind, which is exactly what is meant by the word rethink, relationship-enhanced thinking. Rethinking your connection to both yourself and others. On this episode of the Rethink Podcast, we're exploring how to turn conflict into connection and doing so during times that heat up. Let's start with the basics and ask ourselves, what do we really know about anger? Well, first off, anger is universal. We all get angry from time to time. So if you think you have anger problems, I want you to partially relax. Please know it's a natural emotion and something that we turn to from time to time. But the challenge is whether you control your anger or if your anger controls you. Every one of us feels it, but very few of us know how to decode anger, let alone grow from it. I'm reminded of a person who eventually became a client. He was in my office being seen for a different reason by a different therapist. And he walked down my hallway and he saw a book that really sparked his interest. I happened to be in the hallway as well, and he asked, are these my books? And they just so happened to be my books. And I said, yep, they're my books. Why do you ask? He goes, this one right here. Is it a good book? I looked at that book, and I believe it said something like The Angry Marriage. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's what it was. I said, yep, it's a good book. He goes, that's my problem. Can you help me with it? To make a long story short, yes, he did have an angry marriage. But what he needed to learn, the insight he needed to gain, wasn't that anger was the problem, is that he wasn't in control of his anger. And he used it as a primary go-to emotion that really disrupted his marriage and his family dynamics. But this is why the concept of anger algorithm was created. And yeah, I wanted to break down anger in such a way that it was digestible and knowable, reproducible as a way to get ahead of it. So here's another tidbit about anger. It originates from your past. This idea, based on the relationship intelligence principle, that the past is always the problem. If you've tuned into any of my podcasts, I'm sure you've heard that a time or two. The past is always the problem. It's one of my truisms. But this principle is a foundational truth, revealing that individuals are not the source of their problems. They're a byproduct. That's right. The knowledge you accumulated throughout your upbringing and your relationship history from experiences that disrupted your sense of self. They created defenses and barriers that hinder your connection during times of perceived injustices or hurts, times of disrespect. Now, sure, there are times when we become angry about something that appears to have nothing to do with us. For instance, let's take a classic example of when you're driving on the highway and someone cuts you off for no obvious reason. The sudden burst of intense confusion and unfairness in that moment, when silence grows louder, quickly consolidates and shifts to anger. But why does anger show up? Why don't we just laugh it off? Or why don't we turn to compassion and think about the tension that the other driver might be experiencing? The reason why anger shows up lightning quick is because we've learned that it's wrong for another person to intentionally harm someone, including you. This moral judgment, well, it's deeply rooted in lessons learned long ago. Those lessons that you learned during times you weren't aware that you were being taught. Consequently, getting back to the traffic incident, your anger reflects your learning history. What you're experiencing so strongly is your past influencing the present and shaping your future. Once again, the past is always the problem. Once again, the question becomes, is your anger a force that controls you, or are you in control of it? Another truism about anger is that if left unchecked, anger can and will damage relationships and block progress. This is where, when you get a reputation of being angry, people step away from you, not towards you. But what if there was a framework to understand the sequence of events that lead to anger so we could catch it before it erupts? That's what I call the anger algorithm. This is a tool that helps leaders and teams, parents and partners reframe conflict and transform it into connection. So let's get going by rolling up our sleeves and getting into how we can navigate conflict to restore connection when things heat up. The anger algorithm isn't a formula in the math sense. It's a mental model for how anger starts, then builds, and then settles inside of us. The anger algorithm focuses on process. So let me pull up my whiteboard. And it says anger algorithm. So the first thing that we need to focus on is what I call the roadmap. Life's triggers, well, they include like betrayal, frustration, injustice, just to name a few. These are like routes on a map. Again, these routes reflect your lived experiences when your life felt unfair and you were wronged. Recognizing the roads that lead to anger, well, this is the first vital step. Remember, anger shows up from a perceived wrong or injustice. So I want you to think about the roadmap are being these roads that are comprised of your past revisited. That's the roadmap we're talking about. It's the combination, remember, of your upbringing, your relationship history. It's everything that you've been through. These are your biographical reference points, and they show up. And when they show up unexpectedly, anger is soon to follow. But what makes anger so unpredictable and difficult to navigate is that everyone has their own roadmap. I want you to keep that in mind. While we're very close, and sometimes we can investigate very clearly our roadmap. In fact, I think we have a responsibility to understand the different roads in terms that we've gone down. but other people have different roadmaps. And this is going to be an entry point into turning conflict into connection. So when I say the roadmap, I want to say welcome to the origin of you. You might remember in a previous podcast, we broke it down. But this is where, again, your upbringing and your relationship history combined with your imagination to create a map of how the world works. You can see why it's critically important to start with a roadmap. The bottom line is that because you've learned the difference between right and wrong, when something happens to you that is quickly recognized as wrong, you will react. We all do. And our impulse is to protect ourselves by shutting down, going numb. I was going to say dumb, but sometimes we shut down, we go numb or play dumb. And sometimes we try to get even. This retaliatory impulse, while deeply embedded in human psychology, this is the problem. It makes things worse. This reality also explains why in my book, Mind Rules, the first rule is the mind is not relational. It may surprise you to know that your mind is not designed to bring people together. Instead, self-preservation is your mind's top priority. So knowing about your roadmap that reflects what you've learned is essential to begin managing the surge of anger. But this is just the beginning. Keeping your roadmap in mind, we need to know what to do next. This is when having a compass comes in handy. So below roadmap, I'm going to put the word compass. And this is where we start putting our values into action. I like to think of the compass as your moral guidance system. A well-calibrated compass keeps your response aligned with your values and long-term goals, even when emotions spike. Yeah. We all know that a compass has 4 points: north, south, east, and west. In the world of relationship intelligence, this inner compass, well, it reflects your personal values, your coping strategies, your ability for emotional regulation, and even co-emotional regulation. That's right, being able to effectively help another person regulate their emotions. And of course, your evolving relationship intelligence and understanding of the power of mutuality. And I want you, and we learn about relationship intelligence and the power of mutuality to the point where we begin to turn conflict into connection and begin to do it naturally. Again, we're not fearful of the conflict because underneath conflict is an unmet need. Our compass gets us back on track, back on the right road. While the roadmap informs about your triggers, the compass keeps you heading towards your goal while honoring your values and keeping mutuality in mind. So finally, keeping the roadmap in mind and your compass, finally, there's the fuel gauge. Fuel gauge, this measures intensity. I like to call it your energy monitor. What is that? If you catch yourself while the tank is still half full, you can regulate and co-regulate before it overflows. High levels can cause explosive outbursts, while lower levels might lead to irritation and annoyance. Those are what we call healthy reactions. Being aware of this gauge helps you employ self-regulation and what I was talking about before, co-regulation strategies, such as controlled breathing, compassionate disengagement, or turning to curiosity rather than judgment. before anger becomes too intense and you say or do things that are hard to undo. Now, together, these tools, the roadmap, the compass, and the fuel gauge, they give leaders a way to anticipate, guide, and regulate anger so it doesn't derail relationships. Let me give you a life example. Picture a project leader whose idea was dismissed in front of her team. Her roadmap recognizes the familiar route. Feeling disrespected, it imbalances her. She checks her compass. She recalls her value of collaboration over confrontation. She glances at her fuel gauge and notices she's already at 3/4 full. Instead of snapping back, she takes a pause, shifts her attention to her fast-twitching feet, intentionally slows down, breathes in and out softly, reframes the comment, and invites her colleague into a solution. What could have been a fractured moment becomes a turning point for connection. Keeping this example in mind, here's our call to action this week. Try this. The next time you feel irritation rising, ask yourself 3 quick questions. First, which road am I on? What's the trigger? What part of my past has entered into the present and is about to undermine my future? Remember that when anger shows up, it's signaling that a storyline from your past is repeating. I want you to use your awareness of your anger as a signal to pause, reflect, and be curious rather than judgmental. Then, ask yourself, where's my compass pointing? Am I about to act out of values or against them? Is this a good time to practice what I preach or stay on my high horse? The third, ask yourself, how much fuel is in my tank? Do I need to slow things down and regulate before I erupt? Also, consider how much fuel is in the tanks of others. Ask yourself, how can I help to co-regulate the room? These checkpoints can help you transform anger from a liability into a catalyst for growth. So keep in mind that anger doesn't have to sabotage your leadership. I know it sounds like it's hard to do, but yet we have to increase our awareness of when it's showing up. Moreover, conflict doesn't destroy relationships. In fact, handled well, it's the birthplace of trust. That's what happens. That's the byproduct of turning conflict into connection. We actually get to know more about ourselves and others than ever before. And when you learn to decode anger, using a roadmap, a compass, and a fuel gauge, you can steer it towards connection and clarity. Thanks for joining me on the Rethink podcast, where we challenge old patterns and reframe conflict and opportunities. Now, I'd like to take time and invite you to visit davidzierk.com to sign up for our newsletter called Refresh, or download resources, read a blog or two, and learn more about my quizzes and speaker topics. You can also get quick tips about relationship intelligence on YouTube and Instagram. Until next time, keep rethinking how relationship intelligence can help you turn conflict into connection, especially when things are heating up. This has been fun. Thanks for listening and learning.